I start from one premise. There's no such thing as a good or evil individual. There's just an individual. And everybody is going to come in with a different view. I mean, I have people that think, well, Donald Trump's an evil person. No, Donald Trump's our savior. I mean, I see polarities all over the place. I, I've known Donald for 30 years, so I know he's got both sides. I don't judge him one side or the other. I see both sides of the guy. But what's interesting is people want to polarize it and put a label on it and want you to then agree with them. If not, you're the out group bias. And if you're like them, then you're in group bias. And so I don't start there. I start with the idea that they're an individual, which means undivided. They're not a person, which is a persona mask, an imposter. They're an undivided being. And I basically assist them in finding the side that they're ignoring to take their ignorance back into the truth about the individual. And so I've had the opportunity to work with all kinds of people.
Welcome to the Global Affair podcast, brought to you by Love Out Loud, the world's largest love-based movement, actualizing a civilization of love by 2030. My name's Nicole Gibson, and join me and some of the world's brightest minds as we bring some of the most important and controversial conversations of our time into a space of unity. It's important to know that as your host, this isn't about my personal opinion or bias, but rather an opportunity to listen with love, honesty, curiosity, and reveal the true universal experience us humans have amongst the differences. So if you love the show, please let us know by giving us a rating and tell us how to make this conversation easier for other people to jump into as well. And with that, let's get it. Dr. John Demartini, I have been reeling for this interview. The biology of perception is truly one of my favorite conversations to have. And after digesting a huge amount of your content, especially today, I'm just very excited to learn from you and to share this very potent message, I think, with our community of entrepreneurial innovators that are very passionate about health, very passionate about living their best life. And most of them, I would say, are familiar enough with your work, but for the sake of those that maybe aren't, I'd love to just hear in your words your mission and legacy that you're leaving on the planet.
Well, since I was 17, I've had a dream to travel the world and teach.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah, I'm 70 this year, so I guess I'm useless everywhere else. That's about all I'm pretty good at. And I spent the last 52 years almost dedicated to researching, writing, traveling, and teaching. And anything to do with maximizing human awareness and empowering the 7 areas of life and, doing something extraordinary, the evolvement of our consciousness, you might say. That's my love. So I just do that every day, 7 days a week.
I love just understanding your journey more and more today. You didn't read your first book until you were 18 years old. And since then, you've read over 30,000. And you've discovered that your strength is to pull, information from all of these places that you've learned from and to summarize that and make that readily available for people. That is a massive transformation, albeit still happened earlier in life. What was that emotional transformation like for you? Because I know you've spoken a lot about the practicalities of that transformation, but what was that emotional journey for you like to go from where you were to kind of this determination that you found that allowed you to pursue this mission that you've been on ever since?
Well, I had a speech impediment as a child. I had to go to a speech pathologist when I was about a year and a half old to 4. And then I was told in first grade I'd never read, write, or communicate. So I guess I specialize in that today because of it. But it was such a small, incremental, step-by-step process. I mean, when I first started to learn to read, I went to a dictionary and I started to read 30 words a day. And I wrote the words 20 times. I wrote the definitions 20 times. I wrote a sentence with those words 20 times and the pronunciation. And I memorized 30 words a day. My mom used to test me on them to grow my vocabulary. And over a 2-year period, I had 20,000 words that I wouldn't have had if I hadn't have done that.
Hmm.
And that allowed me to start accelerating and learning it. And so it's just a slow day by day incremental change. So it wasn't this drastic
Hmm.
emotional thing, but it happened after failing a class. Everybody in the class got 75 and above, and I got a 27. I
Hmm.
tried to take a class in school and I just failed. And that was the determining factor, and something my mom had said, uh, that no matter what I do in my life, she's going to love me. That really catalyzed me to want to go and overcome the learning process. And now I've just been a voracious reader ever since. So once I learned I could, I guess I never put that down. I've just been doing that every day. And I love learning. I love sharing. And I can't think of anything else I'd rather be doing. So I do it every day. And if
Yeah.
you do it a little bit every day, it's not like people think it's like some significant thing, but it's just a little bit every day. It just adds up after a while.
Hmm. This moment where your mum, was it a specific moment where she communicated to you, hey, you know what, no matter what happens, there's going to be unconditional love here? I think that
Yeah, what she
that's so
what
extremely
she,
powerful.
what yeah, what she said was, I came home and I was curled up in a fetal position on the living room floor in a sunken living room underneath this little Bible stand. Don't know why I chose that spot, but I just was laying there curled up and really having a moment that, because the dream that I had when I was 17 to travel the world and teach was shattered by this 27 on a test. And I thought,
And
wow,
how old
I
were
was
you
really humiliated
at that time?
right at 18. And
18. Okay.
I, I, uh, I thought there's no way. I just kept hearing my first grade teacher, I'm afraid your son will never be able to read or write or communicate effectively.
Mm.
And my mom came home from shopping and she saw me sitting on the floor and she saw me crying. And I said, and she said, son, what happened? What's wrong? I said, Mom, I blew the test. I guess I'll never read, write, or communicate. Never amount of thing, never go very far in life. And she just paused and she finally put her hand on my shoulder and she said, son, whether you travel the world and become a teacher and travel the world like you dream, whether you go back to Hawaii and ride giant waves as a surfer like you've done, or you return to the streets and panhandle as a bum, which you've done. I just want to let you know that your father and I are going to love you no matter what you decide to do. And when she said that, my hand went into a fist and I looked up and I saw a vision of me standing on a balcony, um, in front of about 1 million people. And this picture, which I have, somebody's painted it from Melbourne, Australia, actually.
Oh wow.
They painted they
That
painted this
moment.
picture after a talk that I did. If I can find it, I'll show it to you because it was an amazing painting this guy had done, and he
Absolutely.
captured what I saw. Let me see if I can dig it out of here.
And this was just from listening to you tell this story. He depicted it.
I was telling the story, and he came up to me afterwards, and he asked if he could paint the vision that I had. And he did, and he painted this thing. It's a 5 by 4 foot painting, and he sent it to
Wow.
Houston framed.
Oh wow. How incredible. And this
And the
is
painting,
like pretty much verbatim what you had seen?
this is exactly the only thing that's different is that instead of me being a teenager at the time, looking out at this, he painted me in it
Mm.
on the balcony
Right.
because
Those are the
I'm looking
perspective.
from my eyes. Yeah, he
Yeah.
put me on the balcony. And then
Mm.
but there was an iconic building from every major city around the world. So all major cities had an iconic building in the background.
Hmm.
So it's not one city, it's just iconic. And the
In
name
your
of the
actual
painting is,
vision?
yeah, in my vision, I saw the world. And
Wow.
I didn't know all the buildings, but I just saw myself going the world. He painted all these
Okay.
iconic buildings in.
Wow.
And he called the painting "A Man on a Mission with a Vision and a Message." And there's a
How
new
cool.
movie that's coming out in a few weeks that, we're premiering in London called The Breakthrough Movie, which has
Mm.
some of this story in it that they've done. And so it's very inspiring. And that painting's in it, in that movie. very inspiring to hold that dream. And when I failed and my mom said that, I saw that vision again. And then I
Wow.
made a statement to myself, I'm going to master this thing called reading, studying. I'm going to master this thing called teaching and philosophy. And I'm going to do whatever it takes. I'm going to travel whatever distance. I'm going to pay whatever price to give my service of love across this planet. I'm not going to let any human being stop me, not even myself. And I had this determination, no turning back moment.
Hmm.
There was no, there's no way I wasn't going to move forward. And I got up and I hugged my mom and I thanked her and I went in my room and that's when I started memorizing 30 words a day. And my life changed.
Hmm.
I went from the bottom of the class to the top of the class within a relatively short period of time. Because if you grow your vocabulary 30 words a day, you start picking up and you can start understanding words and it
Yeah.
was a slow process. And I just then shortly after, just months later, my mom said, "What do you want for your birthday?" I was turning 19, and I said, "I want the greatest teachings on the face of the earth by the greatest minds who ever lived from around the world." And she said, "You sure you don't want a T-shirt?" I said, "No, I don't want a T-shirt. I want knowledge." And she
Hmm.
said, "Well, let me see what I can do." And she contacted her brother, Uncle Ralph, I called him, who lived in another city, and he was a professor at MIT. And as a gift, he sent on a flatbed truck two 6 by 6 by 6 foot wooden crates of books
Wow.
of all different types. And I took a crowbar and opened up these things. They put it on the ground from this flatbed truck, and I opened up it with a crowbar and took all these books in my room and went to work. And I started reading, every hour that was available. I slept about 4 hours a day for many, many years. And so 20 hours a day, if I wasn't going to class, I was reading.
Wow.
And I was in heaven because now I had books. And some of the books that I read had such an impact on my life. Godfrey
Hmm.
Wilhelm Leibniz, the Discourse on Metaphysics and Monadology and Theodicy, and Paul Dirac, his Principles of Quantum Mechanics, and many books. I just started devouring with the help of dictionaries and mathematical symbol dictionaries, all kind of things. And I just started to go to work. And anything that might give me insight on how to maximize human awareness and potential, I was interested in. And finding the hidden order in the apparent chaos of life, that was my real focus because I
Hmm.
really believe that there was a hidden
Intelligent.
order behind the chaos.
Yeah, it's that's a very shared sentiment. There's a divinity and a sequencing and everything. And I'm curious, having now found yourself in a place where you couldn't get enough books, 20 hours a day. That's an insane amount of dedication to anything, right? How did you then relate to the difficulties that you had struggled, previously? How had you come to understand that once upon a time dyslexia, the things that you were struggling with were in the way of being able to, access these abilities that you clearly then possessed?
Well, I believed what my teacher said when I was 7
Mm,
that I had learning problems. And
yeah.
then after I met Paul Bragg that night when I was 17, um, I started to think, well, maybe I could transcend that. Maybe I could break through that.
Hmm.
And when I failed that test, I thought, well, maybe I can't. But when my
Mm,
mom said what she said, I thought, well, I'm going to try it far harder.
yeah.
And then when I tried and I was making progress, uh, I was amazed at what you can do if you set your mind to something. There was no option. There was
Mm.
no backup. Well, if I can't, I can always go surfing. I just made a decision that I was going to whatever what didn't matter what it's going to take. I'm going to learn words and I'm going to
Mm,
learn how to understand to read. And I just wanted to read. I started reading. I read starting at age 18, almost 19. I started reading encyclopedias, and
mm,
I remember I read Lands and People, and I read Popular Science Encyclopedia, and I read all the encyclopedias. Britannica came out. I mean, I got access to Britannica, Americana, and I just sat and read page by page through encyclopedias, 8 complete sets of encyclopedias, in addition to all these books, just to grow my vocabulary.
Mm.
I wanted to, I didn't want to be at the bottom of the class. I wanted to be at least as caught up as everybody else. So I just wanted to learn. Then I realized that if I organize my knowledge, I'll retain it more. And if I teach it to somebody, I'll teach it. So I'll tend to retain it. So I started teaching at age 18. And
Mm.
it started out with one lady, then another guy, and then about 17 people in the class. And by the time I was 19, I got all those books from my uncle. I was already teaching it in my own little classes at the library and at the college. And by the time I was 20, 21, I was doing classes every day under the trees, outdoors, or in the cafeteria if it rained, every day to 100, 125, 150 people. Sometimes 400 people would gather.
Mm.
And I used that as an incentive to make sure I had something new and presentable every day. So I would devour information and then I would present things. And I've never stopped. I read every day and I teach every day. Still do it.
I love that. And at that point, were you seeing it as kind of like a budding career in personal development and teaching? Is that how you were understanding it at that time in your life?
When I was 18, Paul Bragg mentioned the word universal laws.
Mm.
And I thought they were cool. They sounded cool. Universal laws. I want to know what those are.
Map to
And
reality.
yeah, so I went to a dictionary and I said, what exactly is a universal law? Well, what does universal mean?
Mm.
First, to look that up. What's a law mean? I didn't put that together. And I finally came across natural laws of the universe that Aristotle mentioned.
Mm.
And that led me to what was called the logos, which
Hmm.
was the reason and plan in the universe, you might say, the, the word of the universe. And then that made it branch into ologies, which are subsets of the logos, all
Hmm.
the disciplines these days. So I made a list of every discipline and study that you could study. And then I made a commitment. I figured that an average PhD would read about 100 books by the time they'd start to finish in all the
Mm.
classes. So I made a commitment to read 100 books in every ology. And the purpose of that was to try to find the most universal principle that applied in each ology that I could build a foundation of knowledge on.
Mm.
So that's where it started. And then at age 18, I also had a dream. I watched a movie or a show called Kung Fu with David Carradine.
Yeah.
And he said kept referring back to this Chinese master he had, the Shaolin master. And I thought, wow, I like that word master. And I made a commitment to myself. I want to master my life. I want to study these universal laws. I want to build a body of knowledge, and I want to share information that can help people master life and live, magnificent lives.
Mm.
And I divided life into 7 areas at the time: spiritual, mental, career, financial, family, social, and physical. And then I said, I'm going to study everything I can in each of those areas. And I'm going to take whatever I study and link it into how do I master those 7 areas. And I want to do it for myself. I want to master my own life. Einstein said the greatest teacher is exemplification. So I wanted to live that.
Mm.
And then I realized that if I help other people do that, I get to do it. And so
Hmm.
I realized it was a fair exchange dynamic between myself and others, that if I teach it to others, I tend to learn it, but I also get to share it with them, and it's a fair exchange.
Mm.
So I just, once I learned that, I just started teaching every day. I mean, I've been teaching every day for a long time.
Yeah. I mean, we're living in a world right now, right, where I think the man-made law has become the last few years tighter and tighter and tighter. In all that you now know about universal law, divine law, what's your perspective on where we find ourselves as humanity at the moment?
Well, uh, the universal law, the laws, natural laws of the universe, or in theology, divine law, if you want to call it that,
Mm.
um, are unviolatable. If they're
Yeah.
true divine laws or true universal laws, they're unviolatable. You don't violate those. The human
Mm.
laws, you can't live. They're violatable.
Hmm.
They're violable. So what happens is our amygdala wants to survive and avoid predator and seek prey and avoid death and seek life, and sets up moral hypocrisies that are one-sided that nobody can live. Nice, never
Righteousness.
mean, kind, never cruel. And so
Yeah.
we end up getting caught in human misunderstanding of the natural laws. And then what
Mm.
we do is we end up going around, well, I'm not perfect yet, or we're not perfect yet. And we think perfection is one sidedness when the actual perfection is the synthesis of all of the unity of opposites, as Heraclitus said.
Mm.
And universal law of the unity of opposites, nobody violates. But the
Mm.
human law that trying to get rid of half of yourself and only be one sided, nobody can live.
Yeah.
So human laws are were designed, at least idealistically, to be governed by divine law. But what they did is humans with their frail understanding created gods, anthropomorphic deities, to justify their laws and made
Mm.
them divine so people would follow them, only to
Yeah.
find out that there's moral hypocrisies instead
Mm.
of actually really building laws according to universal laws. And that's been my objective, to create
Mm.
physiology, sociology, psychology, and theology according to universal laws, not just human laws, and take the anthropomorphisms out and put
Mm.
in the universal nature, the non-local, non-traditional, non-tribal thinking process into a universal state. So that's been my objective, like Herbert Spencer and Mills and many others along the way.
Brilliant. You know, I think we've been constantly sold this idea that we can only be half of the whole. That when you grow up watching movies, you're either a bad guy and a bad guy can't do good, or you're a good guy and a good guy can't do bad, and we end up divorcing half of ourselves. You know, the primal aspect of self with the wisdom that these two things are designed to come together, even though they're polarities of their own kind. And it's there that we can really tap into, well, at least from my experience, your true potential as a human being to have love and power. And I think a lot about global leadership, especially right now in the world, and where the role models are that can show actually, love can come hand in hand with power. And I think because we have so rarely seen it, we kind of have this tendency to judge power as a bad thing. This part of ourselves that's instinctual, that draws from, I guess, a more sort of primitive aspect of ourselves, that we need that in order to pursue something meaningful in our life. We need to be able to stand up and take a hit, and have something that's driving us, but that can also coexist with love. And I hear from the story with your mom that, unconditional love, the touch of unconditional love in your life, was a big part of your story and what defined you. I'd love you to just speak to these kind of ideas, and how someone might, come to a place where they're beginning to reconcile themselves again, balance these opposites, which are actually just, spectrums of the same thing, to find more harmony in their life.
Well, I think you just nailed it. You said it. I don't.
From your
I
perspective,
think,
your perspective, I haven't read 30,000 books on it though.
yeah, um, we get trapped in these moral hypocrisies,
Mm.
these monopoles, in search of the monopole,
Mm.
instead of embracing the whole, embracing ourselves. I went to the Oxford Dictionary when I was, this is 40 years ago now. Um, so I would have been about 30.
Mm.
And I went to the Oxford Dictionary. It's the largest dictionary I could find, that little thin, small print little dictionary, but massive big dictionary. And I went through line by line and word by word and identified, because I loved reading dictionaries anyway. And I went through, and anytime I found a human behavioral trait, kind, cruel, nice, mean, positive, negative, or a label that we put on humans,
Mm.
I underlined it. Out to the side, in the little margin out there, I wrote
Mm.
down the initials of somebody I knew who displayed that trait to the fullest. Who is the
Mm.
most extreme example of that I knew? And I
Mm.
wrote their initials. And then I stopped methodically, and this is a neurosis of mine. I stopped out there and I said, okay, John, go to a moment where and when you perceive yourself displaying or demonstrating the same specific trait, action, or inaction,
Mm.
um, until you can see that you do this quantitatively and qualitatively equal to this person that you think is the most extreme. Because I realized that when I
That
pointed
you're
my finger,
perceiving yourself
pardon me,
ultimately. with the awareness that ultimately we can only perceive ourselves.
Yeah, it was a reflection. So
Yeah.
I realized that I was projecting my label, and I
Mm,
noticed something. And this is something that was written about in many texts, even in the New Testament religious
mm,
texts. It said that beware of judging somebody, for you do the same thing.
yeah. Three
So I
pointing
found
back.
that to be true. Yeah, the three pointing back. So I found out that whenever I was resenting somebody or I saw a trait I resented, it
Mm,
was representing a part of myself that I was ashamed of because I had
yeah.
bought into the moral hypocrisy and was trying to
Mm,
repress that and dissociate from it and create a pride to cover it up and then project that onto others that reminded me of it. And I did the same thing for
mm,
things I admired. And I realized it was all me, that I had every one of those traits. I found 4,628 individual traits inside me. Now, that's a pretty neurotic thing to do. But I found out that any trait that you don't own is a trait that
mm,
people run your life with.
yeah.
And so fulfillment is owning all the traits, and
Mm,
emptiness is judging and denying the traits in yourself. And
mm,
that's what Plato said at all learning is recollecting. It's recollecting the parts you've disowned and
yeah.
honoring the presence and the necessity and the essentialness of all the parts. And so if any of those parts were not, wise to have, they would have gone extinct, but they're in human
Mm,
behavior for a reason. And we have not always discovered it because we've distorted our reality with a moral hypocrisy about how we're supposed to be, written by the oppressor over the oppressed in society that has been wounded by something, protecting themselves for their own wounds. And we call that moralities and traditions and
mm,
conventions in society. And it's usually when we're wounded or
mm,
frightened or challenged that we collectively join together and set up these rules. So you can see that the wounds of society and the individuals drive these moral hypocrisies and these idealisms and ideologues. There are politicians or religious leaders that like to promote those, but they're basically,
mm,
as a priest says, if you go online and and type in "priest says no hell" on a video and hit videos, you'll find a scholarly Catholic priest that mentions that these were set up to control the masses and to keep them feeling guilty, so they were easy to control. And we
mm,
we do that. And so the question is any area of your life you don't empower, other people overpower. And the real power doesn't come from, this aggressive domination and autocracy and that. It comes from love. That's the real
mm,
power. It comes from having sustainable, fair exchange with other people, doing something you love and helping them fulfill what they would love in life. That's where real
mm,
power is, because that's where you maximize relationships. That's where you maximize business transactions and economic transactions. That's when your health is maximized. Your brain has no noise and it's clear. So
mm,
real power is not oppression over the oppressed. It's the integration of owning the parts and realizing there was nothing but love. All else was an illusion.
mm. It's I just want to round of applause that because I think it's such a potent message right now. And even in my own journey, the fifth principle in the last book that I wrote is what we're trying to control controls us. And it was an exploration of power and kind of the power dynamics that we find ourselves in and what creates power imbalance and how that then starts to rule our life. And really, love is the liberation when we understand that loving ourselves and loving another person is an integration of both the light and the dark, the good and the bad, the things that we adore and the things that we resent. Until you can honestly say that about the people you say you're loving, there's really an absence of love,
No, it's
in
it's a, it's
in those
hypocrisy.
people. Yeah.
It's a hypocrisy. As I just did a presentation a couple weeks, 3 weeks ago, maybe, on the illusions of lightness and darkness.
Mm,
you know,
yeah.
we say we got to get rid of our shadow or something like that. Our shadow is just as light as the shadow. I mean, these are the
Yeah.
illusions we have.
Mm,
When somebody's nice to somebody, people say, well, be nice to the person. Okay, so
yeah.
you're nice to them and you go and do things for them. Well, then you rob them of accountability, responsibility, dignity, and productivity, and you rob them of incentive, and then you end up,
That's it.
making them dependent on you and obligated to you. And you go, well, that's got some downsides. And then you're
Yeah.
tough on them and you're really mean to them, and you say, figure it out yourself. and you think you're doing that, and then you're making them independent and creative and entrepreneur like and more capable and precociously independent, and then maybe that's nice. So these are murky. The idea of a false causalities and false attribution biases that we promote onto people based on our own moral hypocrisies trap us. And you just said it perfectly. When you whatever you try to control out there, that which you're basically frightened of, is what controls your life because you're
Mm,
trying to escape that which is
yeah.
inescapable. The Buddha says the
And it will
desire
show
for
up
that which
everywhere.
is yeah, the desire to seek that which is unavailable and try to avoid that which is unavoidable is the source of human suffering. And as you know, that
Mm,
Jung said that what you try to run away from, you keep running into. So I'm a firm
yeah.
believer in embracing the whole. Now, does that
Mm.
mean that I sometimes don't have skewed, subjectively biased interpretations of my reality and have to learn again? Hell yeah. But that's the journey.
I really would love to get into in just a moment, how we can start to identify these unintegrated perceptions. And I especially love your thoughts on, I have a strong background in mental health innovation. It's a big area of passion. I've advocated for since the beginning of my journey as an entrepreneur that we over medicate, that 95+% of these diagnoses can be resolved through the integration of new perceptions, the balancing out of these emotional charges, which is so possible. So many of us do have the power actually to find that, outcome for ourselves, but the system so rarely holds a space where that becomes possible. And one of the projects that our team and I are working on at the moment is the development of a technology that's measuring emotional state in real time. And one of the things that we've done is abstract emotion. I can kind of, it might even be helpful to see visually. So, we have a combination here of the arousal, so the level of stress, and the motivation or the sentiment, the valence. But we don't say, what specific emotion you might be experiencing, because A, that's subjective, and B, we're quite interested actually in if the abstraction of this takes away the judgment of the experience. And every time I'm showing people this technology, like for example, I onboarded a team of executives last week, and it would be a conversation that otherwise would feel tense and charged. They were looking at the model, and because we abstracted it, we took away the idea of good and bad. They were laughing about it, they were bonding over it, they were able to engage, in a way that I think they'd never been able to before, because that polarization and that judgment of the emotional experience was taken away. Um, and it's amazing, because this is something that is driving like 80% of our decision making is emotional, and we hold so much judgment over the emotionality of our experience. If we're angry, that's bad, and if we're happy, that's good. Rather than embracing the whole human being. And I think that plays out in the mental health system so much as well. We're trying to normalize people all the time rather than helping them embrace who they are. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, just for some reason, this popped in my head. I don't know why I want to say this, but I was getting ready to have lunch with the CEO of American Capital Corporation in Houston, Texas. I had my office up on the 52nd floor, and he had his on the 45th floor, and I went down to meet him at his office. We were getting ready to go across to the gallery to eat. And as I walked in, he was getting up and getting ready. We were going to go. And a guy walks in and says, pardon me for interrupting, but I just need to announce and let you know about something that's happened in the market today. Well, one of his funds went down $457 million or something like that.
Ouch.
And I was thinking, ooh, that would be an ouch.
Yeah.
And he stopped, poised, present, and he said, "Do this, 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 this," and said, "You ready to go to lunch now?" And was just completely neutral on it,
Just completely.
and
Wow.
completely neutral on. I
Mm.
guess he didn't have any attachment to it because he's had fluctuation because the market fluctuates,
Yeah.
and so I asked him on the way to the restaurant. I said, "How do you know how to make the right decision. And he
Mm.
says, I don't. He says, I don't make right decisions.
I just make
I don't use
decisions.
the language.
Yeah.
I don't make right and wrong decisions. And I
Mm.
said, explain. He says, I just make a decision and then I make it right. I
Yeah.
don't make right decisions. And
Mm.
he says, because everything has a pair of opposites.
That's it.
And the broader your awareness, the more you see that no matter what you do, there'll be benefits and drawbacks to it. So which one do you want to take? Which one
Mm.
would be most meaningful and most aligned with what you value most in? And it was a real eye opener. But we go through and our amygdala assigns valency to our sensory experiences.
Yeah.
And then what it does is it then stores that in episodic memory in the hippocampus. At least that's what neurology is showing.
Mm.
And then if it's highly valent, highly charged, the hippocampus stores it right there in that short-term memory until we sleep, and then it goes into some long-term memory, right, to protect us from our predators and our seeking our prey. It's a survival strategy.
Mm.
And most of our valent decisions that we run our lives by day, like you say, are emotionally, subjectively biased interpretations of reality. They're
Mm.
not an objective fact. They're not an executive of objectivity.
Yeah.
And they're
So,
not being guided back to see both sides of things so you can make a wise decision,
mm.
wise action. Let me rephrase that.
Mm.
And so most of our automatons reacting to misperceptions that are associated with previous wounds or fantasies that we're attached to, and then we compound them and promote them and compound them over time and create wellness illness ratios and have these inhibitory excitatory imbalances in our brain that causes demyelinizations of our forebrain many times, and then we end up with all these different quote conditions psychologically and mental illness because we've accumulated these polarizations. I tell people that anytime you see a positive without a negative or a negative without a positive, your amygdala is going to keep strengthening. Every
Mm.
time you see both of them simultaneously and you're more objective and you're poised and present, you
Mm.
wake up your executive function and have you approximate pure reason.
Mm.
Wilhelm Wundt, the father of experimental psychology, said 1896, he said simultaneous contrasts liberate, sequential contrasts in bondage.
Mm.
And that's really true. So we get caught in assigning valency. And most of those, if we look at the source of where they've come, it's the injection of moral hypocritical values by mothers, fathers, preachers, teachers, conventions, traditions, and mores from politicians and religions and ideologues that have basically promoted something that they were doing that was challenging them, that they changed the law to protect them from their challenge. And then we
Yeah.
call those the rules of society. And
Mm.
then the majority of people just follow that and subordinate to that. And then they parrot those things without even questioning them, and then wonder why they're having the illnesses that they have, which are feedback mechanisms to try to get them back to objectivity and sustainable fair exchange and authenticity.
Mm. And the word authority is the author, the one that writes the rules, and like
Yeah,
it's
they're
it's
the author of your life when you do that.
exactly it's written in the etymology of the word, and at any time we can pick up the pen and recognize that we have an equal capacity to create, the rules that we live by. In understanding the universal law and the fact that it can't be corrupted, that it's always at play, no matter how it may seem, in the madness of what's going on in the world. Do you see that, you know, it's the manifestation of such polarity that we're experiencing right now in conversation, like almost the incapacity to listen to someone that has a different belief system, when intelligence itself, right, is the ability to hold contradictions in your mind, and yet so much media right now is just one-sided. Where's this going from a universal perspective? Like, at what point does the rubber band just, snap? And what's that going to look like in your kind of view and prediction in the next 10 years, 20 years?
Well, when they asked Gandhi, does he waste his time reading newspapers or watching television, he said no.
But from an
You know,
evolutionary standpoint,
yeah, the truth has never been in the hands of the masses. It's only in the hearts of the masters. And
mm,
everybody has a master dormant waiting to surface.
Mm-hmm.
And when the student's ready, the teacher appears to reveal the insights that wake up the master inside. So I don't look to the media for any form of, I try my best to bring information to the media, but
Mm-hmm.
most of the time they don't want my information. They want mass
Of course.
polarized
Hysteria.
sensationalism.
Yeah.
They want sensationalism. Can
Mm-hmm.
I share a funny story? I was doing a Wall Street financial show one time, and this guy had me come on his show quite often. It was quite interesting. And right before we went on the show, there was a bunch of guys throwing darts on a spreadsheet, not a spreadsheet, but a computer sheet of printout of a bunch of stocks. And they're throwing darts at it. And I thought, what the hell are they doing there, you know? And I asked the guy, what are they up to? And he says, oh, we found out that we throw darts at this sheet, and whatever it comes to, we make that the hot stock tip for the day. And
Good
I
strategy.
said, so you just randomly do that? He says, yep. He says, because the people that watch our show, intelligent people wouldn't pay attention, wouldn't do that. They would look for intrinsic value, and they would, buy value stocks, and they would be patient and buy things and hold and reduce taxes and cost and stuff. And he said, but the gamblers out there, which is most the wannabes out there, they want a hot stock tip so they can feel like they've got some pride telling people they've got this cool tip. And he said, so we give it to them. And I said, so what you're really saying is that as a pundit, you're basically promoting a fantasy for marketing and sensating people. He said,
Yeah.
yep, this is a commercial enterprise. It's an entertainment and commercial enterprise. It's not the facts about business. And I always say that Wall Street was never designed for you, the customer. It's designed for Wall Street to get wealthy. And the average person doesn't realize that. And actually, investing is very simple because it's taking the emotions out. Emotions in the investing is, as Warren Buffett says, until you can manage your emotions, don't expect to manage money. So that's the same in all areas of our life. As long as we let our amygdala run our life, we'll be in survival. And you
Mm,
don't self actualize your life in survival.
mm,
And so asking quality questions, the quality of life is based on the quality of the questions you ask. Intelligent questions are ones that bring you back to the golden mean, as Aristotle said, brings you back to see the pairs of opposites synchronously and able to see both sides and hold paradoxes and contradictions in your mind simultaneously. That's what a leader does. And so the individual who's willing to do that and not be, you know, perturbed by these sensational valencies that the amygdala grabs attention on. If you go to sleep at night and you're highly resentful, you can't sleep. If you're highly infatuated, you can't sleep. You get intrusive thoughts by these highly valent situations. And so people are having these anxieties of high polarity, fearing the loss of what they seek and fearing the gain of what they are avoiding. And they're distracted and aging and enterprising instead of actually integrating and empowering and focusing on the quality information that stands the test of time, which is more universal in nature. They're letting the sensations of the immediate gratification interfere with the long-term vision of contribution. And if you do that, you don't pay attention to the news. In my
mm.
case, I go on the news and I share information. I asked him, I said, why do you have me on here? He says, because we can handle about an 8 to 10% real content. And so we need guys like you to come on and do something that's meaningful. And people then go, wow, that was interesting. But then they want that hot tip.
Yeah, they want the Wall Street dot selected hot tip.
Yeah. Wall Street tries to make it complex and give them these hot tips, which makes their life more complex and more turmoiled. And then they brain offload decisions onto the pundits and onto the so-called experts that like to gamble their money away.
Mm. When a situation is lodged in the subconscious mind and it's filled with charge, is it then the nature of how your life will continue on to unfold? The essentially the balancing act. Is that where, is that basically the completely predictable route? Like if you're holding a polarization or something that's unprocessed, some kind of charge, that your life will then start to pull in its opposite in order to rebalance you? Is that
Yes.
essentially an inevitability?
Yeah. Because what you're going to do is anything that's charged negatively, you're going to try to avoid and seek its opposite.
Yeah.
And in the process of doing that, whatever you try to run away from, when you seek a one-sided magnet, the other side of the magnet comes after you. So if you're
Hmm.
looking for innocence, you attract the perpetrator. If you look for protection, you attract the aggressor. Whatever you seek, you attract its opposite to break your juvenile dependency from being seeking that which supports you. Because you get
That.
supported, you stay juvenile dependent. You need the challenger to break you through that. So yeah, the pursuit of a one-sided life is futile.
Mm.
Anytime you infatuate with somebody, you're going to try to sacrifice your life for them. Anytime you're resentful, you're going to want to sacrifice them for you. That's a slow suicide and a slow homicide. But but if you go and see both sides, you stabilize yourself.
Mm.
So your intuition is constantly trying to reveal to you the unconsciousness to wake it up equal to the consciousness to be fully conscious.
Mm.
But your impulses and instincts are trying to dramatize and polarize it for survival, to accentuate the capturing of prey and avoiding its predator. But the intuition is trying to bring you a negative feedback system back to homeostasis and stability. And
Mm.
at the ratio of your, does your intuition overrule your impulse and instincts, or do your intuition,
Mm.
subdue to them? And the quality of your life is based on the questions you ask. If you ask questions that equilibrate the mind, you strengthen your executive function. If you ask
Mm.
questions that dramatize the mind, you strengthen your amygdala. And your amygdala is the animal mind, and the other is the guardian angel of your life. So
Mm.
I'm a firm believer in asking quality questions. I've tried to develop systems to ask quality questions to liberate people from the intrusive thoughts of things that are highly valent.
Mm. And is a part of that system of questioning essentially to forcibly put yourself on the other side of whatever it is you feel your sort of being or what you feel is right in that moment?
Well, the addiction to pride
Mm.
is one of and the addiction to philia fantasies
Mm.
um, are probably the greatest weaknesses human beings have,
Yeah.
because they want to be right. They're not willing to listen to reason, and they're wanting the fantasy, immediate gratification. They're not willing to be patient, defer gratification. And
Mm.
these two things differentiate extraordinary lives from ordinary lives, and
Mm.
inspiration from desperation. But that's the ability to override and govern the amygdala with the executive function. And
Mm-hmm.
so anything that trains you to see both sides, meditation, the method I've developed, or any form of questioning that allows you to ask counterbalancing questions to see what you're oblivious to.
Yeah.
A question is designed to take unconscious information, make you conscious. It
Yeah.
was Stephen Wolfram, the mathematician, that said that the tendency to go from order to disorder, entropy towards entropy, is the tendency to misinformation. It's missing information. And the tendency to go back to order is reclaiming the information.
Mm-hmm.
So if you ask questions that reclaim the information, you go from disorder to order. And when you do, you increase longevity, you increase empowerment, you increase your love and appreciation. So yeah, it's all about the questions we ask. And if you surround yourself with great questions that become resourceful, you take yourself back to the
Mm.
source of your being, the essence of your being, instead of the existence of just becoming. So
Yeah.
you would literally have the capacity. Everybody has the capacity to do something extraordinary with their life if they know how to ask the right question. But some
Yeah.
people they want to be victims of their history instead of masters of their destiny. They want to run false attribution biases. Epictetus said, when we blame other people, we're new on our journey. We start to blame ourselves, we're halfway down our journey. When we realize there's nothing to blame, there was a hidden order in there, and there's nothing there to say anything but thank you. It's all on the way. You're finally mastering your life. But
Mm.
we go around with these moral hypocrisy and label things good and bad and have avoidance and seeking responses all day long. And we're basically an automaton, and we're trapped in our misperceptions
It's
and
exhausting.
our elusive false causalities, the karmic wheel, as the Buddha says,
Yeah.
instead of the dharmic path. And I always say that because we have a hierarchy of values, and whatever's highest on our values, where we spontaneous act and where we're most objective, and where it activates our blood glucose and oxygen into the forebrain, where we're most objective. If we'll prioritize our life and fill our day with high priority actions that inspire us and dedicate to our highest priority, and delegate the lower priorities to things that are extrinsically outside circumstances and delegate them, we change our
Mm.
life. I basically teach, research, write, and travel. The rest of it I delegate. Everything else I delegate. When my girlfriend comes and visit, I said, listen, I'm not the greatest in lovemaking. If I hire George Clooney or Brad Pitt to take care of that for me on my behalf, will you still love me? She says, I love you even more. So I delegate.
That's super honest of you, John. Whatever works. I
Easy.
love
That's
it.
a tease.
Yeah,
But the
yeah, yeah.
point is that I delegate when I realize that anything that I'm spontaneously inspired to do is what's high in my values.
Yeah.
Anything that I need reminding, motivating, or whatever
Mm,
that I'm procrastinating, hesitating, and frustrating on, I delegate. And
yeah.
I find people that would love to do that. So I surround myself with people that would love to do what I want to delegate. And that
Mm,
gives me the freedom to go after that. And that keeps you in your executive center and reduces the amount of drama you create in your life.
yeah.
Drama in life is a feedback mechanism to guide you back to what's priority.
And I love you. In one of the interviews I was listening to, you were talking about limiting beliefs being the same thing. That you don't really buy into the kind of idea of limiting beliefs as it's taught maybe in, I don't know, NLP or subconscious reprogramming, but rather you see it more as a map that's pointing you back to the thing that you really love to do. And when you find what you love to do, there's no limiting beliefs in that space. I think that's a really interesting perspective,
Yeah,
and
it's a
one that,
feedback.
yeah.
Because most of the limiting beliefs are you trying to live in other people's values that you've put on a pedestal that you've injected the values to. And
Mm,
Freud called it the superego. And so you migrate from mommies to daddies to preachers to teachers to people that you look up to. And then you
mm.
inject the values and become dependent on them and fear the loss of them in your life. And then you try to live in their values instead of your own. And you cloud the clarity of your own mission instead of living authentically. And so you create drama and this self depreciating state as a feedback to let you know anytime you hear yourself saying, I got to, I have to, I must, I should, I ought to, supposed to, and I need to, you know you're trying to live somebody else's values because those
Mm,
aren't yours. Those are extrinsic. When you're doing something you really love, you know you're doing something that's inspiring to you.
yeah.
So I've delegated everything that I've heard any need for outside motivation. I just delegate it to somebody else. Find somebody that absolutely loves doing that and give it to them. Hey, take it and run with it. And if you
Mm,
surround yourself with people that love doing it, they're highly engaged in it. They do a great job. You don't have to micromanage them, and you're free to go do what your core competence.
mm. That's it. My first love was Meisner acting, and the reason I loved it so much was that the premise of the art form is being 100% yourself under the given imaginary circumstances. And what you're forced to kind of come to in that exploration of the art is anytime you have a tendency to disassociate with the set of circumstances, i.e., I would never be, I don't know, a liar, I would never be a cheat, I would never be X, that the art form is about pushing and challenging the ego to the point that it stops to de-identify and starts to inquire and recognize, well, there is an aspect of self that doesn't mean I'll choose to do that, but it does exist within me. And at 15, 16, that was really, I think, my introduction to somewhat of an awakening, recognizing that the identity that I believed Nicole was, or the identity that any of us are carrying around, is simply just a construct. And that the whole human being, the consciousness of the human being, is in its totality. And actually, we find liberation when we give ourselves permission to be responsive to all kinds of circumstances and not resistant, to actually be able to liberate ourselves from those resistances. Was a very kind of defining, it was the defining philosophy, I guess, that catalyzed my life, which I'm so grateful for. But it was interesting that my director's role was to basically push on our ego so much that it would, have no choice but to basically transform. And I know that you do a version of this, right, in your work every day when
Yeah,
you're teaching, no doubt.
I
Share
haven't
out,
I
share
haven't found
that.
anything that's not, I haven't found anything missing in me. I'm nice, I'm mean, I'm kind, I'm cruel, I'm honest, I'm dishonest. Every week in the Breakthrough Experience program, which I've done 1,210 friggin' times,
Well,
I do it. Yeah, I when I do that program, people come in and they'll their pride and their fantasy is that they're an honest person.
yeah.
And I said, well, pick a judgment, pick somebody that you really have a charge on, really
Mm,
highly valent charge and resentment. I said, okay. And they identify who that is, and they identify what they're charged about, and they identify what specific trait, action, inaction that they perceive this individual displaying or demonstrating that they really despise most. And then they have to go in and own it. Now go to a moment where and when you perceive yourself displaying and demonstrating the same specific trait, action, inaction in your own life. And they have to find it until the quantity and quality is equal to what they perceive. And at first they go, I don't do that. I pride myself on not being, I would never do that. And I said, just be honest and dig. And they find it. And I've got about 125,000 people that have found that everything they see out there is inside them. And when they do that, they're humbled. They realize that instead of being too proud to admit what they see in others inside them, they're now able to admit it. And it's humbling, and it cracks their fantasy of who they are and starts to ground them and realize they're still loved for all of it.
Yeah.
Then I realized, I said, all right, now let's go to a moment when they actually did the behavior. And in that moment, how did it benefit you? How did it serve you? What were the upsides and advantages? Until the advantages were equal to the disadvantages, until it was neither positive nor negative. So I neutralized the valency on it and had them own it. So self and other reflection is pure and the positive negatives are pure. And I said, right now, are you angry at them? They go, no. I said, so you came in here with a perception that you thought was true, which was actually a false opinion, a subjective biased opinion. And now can you see that you are a liar to yourself and other people because you ran the story and the drama of the story. So anytime you have an emotion, you have a lie. Ooh, that's a hard one to face because you have an emotion to seek or avoid, which means you have an incomplete awareness of the event. And so then they realize, they say, okay, so now if you think you're searching for an honest person inside yourself, just know you're both. As Diogenes searched all over Europe for an honest person with a lantern searching, in the time of Socrates, he never found an honest person. So I don't try to promote this fantasy of one side and thou shalt be this and thou shalt not be this. I said, you will not go through life without both distortions.
Yeah.
But once we define what a lie is, it's a distortion of the fabric of space, time, and your phenomenal reality. It's a lopsided perception about reality. And the moment you do, you've got an emotion.
The incapacity to face yourself, right? It's the inability to really
to own your part.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I'm almost sure just the gravity of the people you've impacted over the years. How's your work led you to, I guess, what society would have seen perhaps as the most nefarious of individuals? What have those experiences been like? How has that been, if that's been a part of your work?
Well, I start from one premise. There's no such thing as a good or evil individual. There's just an individual.
But by society's view is kind of my
Well, I start from that premise. And everybody is going to come in with a different view. I mean, I have people that think, well, Donald Trump's an evil person. No, Donald Trump's our savior. I mean, I see polarities all over the place.
Sure.
I've known Donald for 30 years, so I know he's got both sides. I don't judge him one side or the other. I see both sides of the guy. But what's interesting is people want to polarize it and put a label on it and want you to then agree with them. If not, you're the out-group bias. And if you're like them, then you're in-group bias.
Yeah.
And so I don't start there. I start with the idea that they're an individual, which means undivided. They're not a person, which is a persona, mask, an imposter. They're an undivided being. And I basically assist them in finding the side that they're ignoring to take their ignorance back into the truth about the individual. And so I've had the opportunity to work with all kinds of people.
Have you worked with people, say, in high security prisons? Has your work
I worked. Can I share an interesting story?
Please.
I worked with from Japan. I worked with a gentleman who was a pedophile that had 8 years in prison. And the psychologist asked me to work with him to try to break the pattern that he had. And I asked him a question. Okay, so what's the common denominator to all the girls that you went after? And they were between 8.5 and 9 years old. Okay. Now I've seen patterns of what drive the pedophile. I've seen that. I've been studying this in psychology and stuff. And I said, okay, so what happened to you between 8.5 and 9? He says, well, Well, my mom beat me and almost killed me. I
So
said,
just like an obsession being stuck in that moment in his life.
well, watch this now.
Mm.
She caught me masturbating.
Shame. Yeah.
So there was a shame associated with sex
Mm.
and oppressor over the press in his mind. And
Mm.
so he's now an 8.5-year-old boy sitting there with a moral amnesia, you might say, and
Mm.
a moral regression back to that with a
Mm.
shame. And anytime you do, that's stuck in his head in the subconscious mind. And so now he's going to try to, whatever he tries to run away from, he keeps running into. And so what we did
Mm.
is we cleared that over 3 sessions. We cleared the story and the wounds from that by finding all the benefits of his mom's actions and neutralizing it and neutralizing the moral hypocrisies about sexuality. And then we went to each of the children that he had interacted with and we found the
Mm.
other side to it and neutralized it. And that was about, I think, 11 months ago. Hasn't been one urge since then.
Wow. And were you working
So
with him whilst he was still in prison?
no, he'd just gotten out of prison, and the psychologist
Mm.
was responsible for bringing him back into it. But he was now labeled, right? He's not allowed to do this and that and all that by society. But he still had the urges. And
Yeah.
most people think you can't do anything about the urges, but the reality is those have a source.
Mm.
So instead of labeling this person for the rest of their life, this is who they are, I went in
Mm.
there and found out what was the driving process and dissolved it. Has been no urge since.
Wow.
It's back to normal. So I don't like to label people nefarious. I don't like to label because I usually find a false attribution bias and
Right.
an exaggeration by a group of people that are wounded and they're
Yeah.
making generalities about people instead of actually the specifics. And
Yeah.
I'd rather go in and ask questions, allow people to see both sides of people, and then
Mm.
help them transcend their own judgment, which comes from their own behaviors and wounds.
Yeah. So, the reason for my question is the passion I have, for what you're talking about, and such a shared perspective over the past 13 years, the tens of thousands of stories I've had the, you know, honor of being able to listen to. You realize after listening to 1,000 stories, 10,000 stories, 50,000 stories, so on, the human experience is universal. We're all fundamentally seeking the same things, and these differences are just so insignificant compared to the things that unify us. And that's the very much the belief and the place that I come from. And the reason I ask these questions is because I'm passionate about society, questioning and rethinking the labels and the ways that we see some of the people, especially people within, the prison system, that that they've been thrown into a system with really no opportunity for rehabilitation, no opportunity to access, the process that you're able to do with this guy as an example. And I want to highlight to our listeners that this can be universally applied, whether it's someone that's going through, I don't know, a hard breakup, someone who's dealing with the trauma of what happened to them in childhood and that led to pedophilia, all the way through to, I don't know, I guess, what would come to mind for people as the most unforgivable act, which I suppose would be murder. What's your experience there in someone that has been labeled, a full-blown psychopath, for example?
Well, I've asked people, how many of you ever been angry enough to want to, I'd like to kill that son of a gun?
Mm.
And everybody puts their hand up. And so we have what I learned from Nietzsche and from Gurdjieff and many other writers about it, that whatever collective society represses, selective society expresses.
Yeah.
And we point our finger at the
It's it's
selective
it's it's a whole
villain,
class
but the
integration.
villain is actually the steam kettle's release of the steam pressure of the repression of society.
Mm.
And so we collectively, I've seen this in family dynamics. Whenever there's a sexual repression, there's a precocious expression of sexuality in other family members.
Yeah.
And the society is the same way. Whatever's repressed has got an overexpression somewhere else. And
Mm.
usually collective is the many that repress lead to the few that express. And we basically label these the bad guys because our repressions are labeled good, but it's
Mm.
really a repression.
Mm.
So as Machiavelli said, you got to be able to air the saint and the sinner if you want to be authentic.
Mm-hmm.
We are repressions. If I took a group of people that were repressing their anger and actually got them to outlet it in other forms, the probability of the murdering and the aggression in the handful of people that we end up putting in prisons goes
Yeah, they
down
won't use it.
because it's a
Mm-hmm.
repression expression dynamic. So I
Yeah,
don't label these the evil ones and these the good ones, because the
totally.
good ones are thinking the very thing the evil ones expressing.
Mm.
They're plays of
Yeah,
opposites.
right. And to reach a place as a society where we understand this enough to completely rethink our systems, like that's something I would love to see in my lifetime. That we no longer, build systems that perpetuate this kind of separation. That we actually have systems that are facilitating that path of reconciliation back to wholeness, back to self. Um, I want to see that. I really, really want to see that in my lifetime across the board, not just, correction and justice, but education and health, um, on health. What are your perspectives on what we could do practically to start to influence and infiltrate mental health treatment, in the West? Because I know,
Well,
I'm passionate about that. Our listeners are passionate about that.
exemplifying it. That's the best one. Einstein said the greatest teacher is exemplification, just exemplifying it and
Mm-hmm.
educating people and letting them exemplify it and gradually influencing the people that have power to influence and set rules. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I had an opportunity recently. There's a handbook of dissociative identity or dissociative or disorders, and we got a chapter in there. And now we got a new paper going into another textbook. So, slowly but surely, if you just stay with something, you have some influence on it. And
Mm-hmm.
I started out teaching the breakthrough experience, 35 plus years ago, 12 people. Now there's millions of people that are influenced by that. So if you just stay with something long enough, you eventually make some sort of an inroads. And usually the old people have to die out and the new people have to come in with who are receptive to new ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And a new paradigm is born.
Yeah. What do you envision when you think about, the say the Gen Zs, their children, when you think about the health system, the education system, can you see, or do you have a vision of what that
Well,
will be like?
what people ask me, I was speaking in Toronto one time and a doctor asked me, uh, where do you see the future of our profession? And I said, if you're asking me, you're a follower. If you're telling me what you're going to do with it. What do you plan to do with it?
Mm-hmm.
What is your intention? And how big is your intention? If your intention is greater than the obstacles melt away and you take over the intention.
Mm-hmm.
If your intention is smaller than the obstacles, then you blame the obstacles for the intention not being manifested. I'm just
Mm-hmm.
a firm believer that if I stay focused on something and consistently contribute to people, that it makes a contribution, and it's happening. So I'm watching it happen right in front of my eyes. So I'm a believer that we can make some difference in it. But for the masses, the majority of people who are mass consciousness that are interested in immediate gratification, the likelihood of self actualizing awareness in the system is not likely. You're going to have a stair stepping, scaled social structure that's going to be there. And as he goes up, there'll be fewer in number and greater in consciousness. As he goes down, greater in number, lesser in consciousness. People at the bottom will be wanting immediate gratification and want a pill for every ill, possibly. The people, as they go up, they'll be looking for self actualizing strategies of intrinsic activity. I'm interested in allowing myself to contribute to those people that are at a certain level up. The
Yeah.
people that are not interested in that, I'm glad that the other forms are out there for it. They fill in the gaps and they teach them, as the Buddha says, they will teach them the illusion until they're ready for truth.
Yeah. Your thoughts on exponential technology?
It's inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
we're not going to be able to do anything except learn how to incorporate it step by step. If it goes too fast, we'll resist it. If it goes too slow, we'll persist it. And it's just going to keep being integrated slowly but surely. I mean, if we look at the evolution of technology, it shows an exponential growth as it goes. It just keeps going that way. We can't comprehend 100 years from now. Whatever
No.
we say, we can run some projections, but I'm sure it will exceed our expectations.
Yeah, it's I think we're moving from like the ability to use first principles thinking to just a total 0 point, where when reality moves beyond the realm of prediction, how a human being's actually going to exist and perceive. I think about that a lot. I don't know if you have thoughts on that. I would be
Well,
interested.
I don't have an anxiety or fear about technology. I'm not a boom and zoom or gloom and doom polarity. I'm not interested in that. I know that there will be advantages and disadvantages, and we will moderate our technologies and refine the technologies to help fulfill the fulfillment of not only ourselves, but the new technologies and the intelligence that comes with it. We will
Hmm.
work together towards our objective. Along the way, there'll be heroes and villains. There'll be perceptions of extremes because of people's polarities and valencies. But the truth is, it'll always be balanced. Just like the volatilities of the stock market go up and down all the time, but the intrinsic value keeps making progress.
Yeah.
I focus on the mean, and I don't focus on the polarities.
The natural cycle of life and death, it's something that you've talked about. What are your thoughts on people that are trying to sort of overcome death in an artificial manner?
Well, I'm not frightened of death. I'm not. I don't live in that because fear of death is basically a result of the addiction to fantasies and pride and fantasies about the future. We fear the
Mm.
loss of that. That's why we have the fear of death. We created eschatological systems and theological systems to compensate for our anxieties about death,
Yeah.
but it's inevitable. We're dying right now in this body. Apoptosis is going on, and catabolism and enzymes. Everything is breaking down and building in equilibrium constantly. So we're living and dying every day. So
Yeah.
it's not like we're now going to suddenly die. We've been living and dying in a nice equilibrium every single day of our life. So
Mm.
I see that it's inevitable, and there's probably some people out there that wish I would go quicker. so
Not
so
our
I
listeners.
if I'm infatuated with myself, I'm going to fear the loss of my life. If I'm resentful to myself, I'm going to want to speed it up. If I
Mm.
love myself, I'm just going to pass through it and know that I'm still on my mission. I'll
Mm.
be
So you
using Ouija boards in the afterlife to do seminars anyway.
yeah, you won't be downloading your consciousness into the
You
cyborg
know
version.
Ouija boards.
That's a great
I've worn Ouija boards.
uh, Dr. Demartini, I've loved this conversation. I'm really so grateful for you coming on the show, and I know you've got a suite of content that would probably take multiple lifetimes for our audience to get through. Where's the best place for them to go and start to digest more of what you're putting out there?
It's probably the best place is good old website, just drdemartini.com, DRDEMARTINI.com. And they go to the YouTubes and they go to all that. But on the website, you get access to all that. And just have them browse and see where it takes you. It's an information website. You're going to have to believe in some sort of reincarnation or something, or be a Buddhist to be able to handle it, because you won't be able to keep up with everything that's on there. It's going to take more than one lifetime.
Perfect. I'm sure that's music to everyone's ears, and maybe a final message to our listeners, knowing that they're hopefully the leaders of tomorrow.
Well, the magnificence of who you are is far greater than any fantasies you'll impose on yourself.
Mm.
So don't put people on pedestals or pits and minimize or exaggerate yourself. Put them in your heart so you can be yourself. When
Mm.
you love other people the way they are, they turn into who you love, and you get to be the one you love. And embrace both sides of yourself. Trying to get rid of half of yourself will be futile, and you're worthy of love no matter what you've done. Embrace it all, and if you do, life's pretty magnificent. I'm pretty grateful for what happens in the journey. And don't compare your fantasy. Don't compare your life to a fantasy about how it should be. Honor the way it is, and
Mm.
hopefully that's useful for people.
I think that's such a beautiful message and such a perfect way to end this conversation. So, thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be on your show. It's great questions, very insightful. Thank you.
Thank you. If you love the show, please let us know by giving us a rating and tell us how to make this conversation easier for other people to jump into as well.